I want to start by asking you about Merck's activities in COVID-19 vaccine and antiviral drug development. Merck, of course, has a tremendous track record, especially recently with your Ebola vaccine in developing solutions for these issues. And your chief of research, Roger Perlmutter, said that during the past quarter century, there have been only 7 vaccines directed against previously unaddressed human pathogens that earned FDA approval. 4 of those 7 were developed by Merck Research Labs. Tell us about your efforts here.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Merck, as a company, has deep expertise and experience, as you know, in antiviral research as well as vaccine research. So from the very beginning of this epidemic, we have been looking at how we can play a particularly useful role in advancing, for example, vaccine research. And we have been in collaboration with other people in industry, with academics around the world. And we have now gotten to a position where we are focusing on some proven platforms, vaccine platforms that we have used before to develop vaccines with desirable qualities. And we are very optimistic and excited about moving forward with some of those programs, the details of which we intend to announce as soon as we can finalize the arrangements.
And Merck's been, a little quieter than other companies on this front, and perhaps not uncharacteristically of the way that Merck typically communicates. But what can you tell us about a potential timeline for a vaccine?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to recognize the context in which we're operating here. This is a novel coronavirus, one that's new to us, one where we're still trying to learn a lot about the nature of the virus itself. We're still trying to learn a lot in terms of the basic biology of the body's immune response to that virus. And with the challenge that we all face across the industry, not just Merck, but all the other companies that are focusing on this issue, is that we have to develop a safe and effective vaccine with unprecedented speed. And at the same time, we have to be able to manufacture and distribute and deploy it at an unprecedented scale. So it is no small challenge that we face. And so the approach that Merck took was, let's make sure that we do as much as we can, again, to make sure that the fundamental biology is understood. And that will allow us to approach the design of a new vaccine with the greatest probability of success.
Tell us about the antiviral search as well. Will that timeline be shorter, and what can we expect to see from Merck there?
I think we expect that antiviral, whether it comes from Merck or one of the other companies working on it, could be developed, more quickly than the vaccine. As Roger said this morning, typically vaccines take a significant amount of time, often decades. We were able to be successful in a public health emergency in Ebola, as you mentioned earlier, bringing forward a vaccine. But even that took years. So from an antiviral standpoint, we think it's possible to either repurpose current antivirals or to develop new antivirals that have significant impact on the COVID-19 situation.
Mr. Frazier, I appreciate the carefulness of your answer to Meg's question about a timeline regarding vaccines. But others have said that don't expect a vaccine to get FDA approval for at least a year from now, and then it'll take more time to get it into production. Does even that forecast sound too optimistic? And then I have one more question I'd like to pose.
I wouldn't say it's too optimistic. What I would say is that Merck has a lot of experience, as you said, in getting vaccines across the finish line. The timeline that we're talking about is, in fact, shorter than any timeline that's ever occurred with a successful vaccine. At the same time, I think everyone recognizes the urgency of this situation. And we have to look at ways beyond sort of the customary ways of doing this. But there is a certain amount of time that's inherent, for example, in doing clinical studies to ensure that a vaccine that you would use in millions, if not billions of people, is truly safe and effective.
So from a leadership point of view, I'm very curious, how do you pivot a company, and specifically the research arm of a company, the size of Merck, to focus on a pathogen you didn't even know existed 6 months ago? How in the world do you do that, and when did you make that pivot? How quickly did you make it?
So let me start by saying my scientific colleagues couldn't be more excited and enthusiastic about taking on this challenge. I think the good thing for us is that we have had a long history in developing antivirals, antibiotics. You know, Merck is one of the largest and most prominent vaccine companies in the world. So we have people who have deep expertise and knowledge in those areas. And so it's easier to get them to pivot to these things. Everybody sees that this is an unprecedented global health emergency. And so people were willing to drop what they were doing, so to speak, and to put their attention immediately on this. And we are cautiously optimistic. I want to make it clear. We are cautiously optimistic that either Merck or one of our industry colleagues will come up with a vaccine that has the right kind of neutralizing antibodies against COVID-19. We think the world should be optimistic because so many smart scientists are focused on this issue at one time, bringing different avenues and different paths.
Mr. Frazier, it's Kelly here back in the studio. Since you're on this committee now with Governor Murphy to reopen New Jersey, a lot of us who live in the state are wondering how quickly can that move along? You know, at a time when states are gradually starting to reopen, New Jersey is one of the hardest hit. And the last we've heard from the governor is that he said the stay-at-home order is basically going to stay in effect for the foreseeable future.
Well, I think, as you know, New Jersey is one of the hardest hit states in the whole country. And again, let's go back to the fact that we're still learning a lot about this particular coronavirus in terms of the nature of it, the extent of it. We're challenged with having the right kind of testing, the right kind of contact tracing. We have to make sure that we think about all those things, and we have to be responsible in bringing the state's economy back into full service, so to speak. So we want to make sure that when we do that, and I think we will do that, and it won't be forever to do that, we have to make sure that we see the number of cases beginning to plateau for a period of time, that we have the testing in place so that we can send people, whether they're consumers or workers, back to more normalcy.
I want to ask you also about sort of Merck's outlook for the year. You did reduce your guidance, expecting a $2 billion hit to your sales. And of course, Merck's pharmaceutical sales are very exposed to people visiting the doctor. A lot of your medicines, vaccines administered in the doctor's office. You guys said you expect to see a peak in the U.S. and Europe, perhaps in the second quarter in the number of cases. What are you envisioning for the rest of the year in terms of even potentially seeing a second wave and how that'll impact your business?
Well, so let me first start by saying we're confident in the long-term prospects of the business. Our first quarter, we think, is really indicative of the strong underlying demand for our products. But as we look forward, we are seeing with stay-at-home orders in place around the country, people just don't have access to, for example, physicians' offices for well visits. You've seen the huge impact on vaccines, elective surgeries. Even in oncology, oncologists are actually delaying some of the visits that would result in a diagnosis or treatment of patients. As we look to the rest of the year, we're optimistic that by the end of the second quarter, we will start to see more normalcy there, either because people will be able to have more free access to those clinics, hospitals, and physicians' offices, or the healthcare system will find safe, alternative ways of treating people. So we think as we go from the second into the third quarter, we will see more normalcy, so to speak, again. But I think at the end of the day, to answer your question, I think none of us really can predict what will happen because this is a new coronavirus. The CDC has said that we can expect to see in the fall perhaps more cases of coronavirus. So our estimates are based, our forecasts are based on the concept that by the fourth quarter, we should see more normal access to physicians and hospitals and clinics.
Well, we sure hope that's the case. Ken Frazier, thank you for joining us. We look forward to staying in touch on your updates on vaccine and drug development. Thank you for being here. Kelly,
it's always a pleasure. And again, I want to reinforce this ample reason to be optimistic that we will find either a treatment or a prevention for this terrible virus. Thank you.